Hey guys, welcome to my Daniel Chia show. And so sorry I was on mute just now. And thank you, Jazzy, for pointing it out. Hope you guys are doing great, having a wonderful day. If you guys are in Asia, it's a nice Friday morning. For those of you who are watching in the US, good evening to you guys. Thank you for staying with us. And welcome to those who are joining us right from the start. Thanks, Jazzy, Vincent, Lian Wei, Miss Lu, and Lilana, thank you so much for being here. If you guys are new to the YouTube channel, you can don't forget to subscribe as well, as we have a lot more videos, a lot more exciting guests to bring to you. Today we're gonna dive into the world of jazz education and speaking a lot more about jazz with Greg Fishman from the US. He's an amazing saxophonist, and most importantly, he works a lot with jazz education. So this is something that we haven't spoken about much in any of the shows, so definitely I'm really looking forward to today. So before we start off, I think a very good way is to show you guys a video of Greg, and this was actually Greg playing in Singapore in 2008 at the Esplanade Theatre, Esplanade Concert Hall, and with Jeremy Monteiro. So I think this will be a perfect way to start off the show, and I'm gonna share with you guys this link. Give me a minute. All right, so here we go. right, so that was Greg Fishman performing in Singapore with Jeremy Monteiro. Hope you guys enjoyed that video clip, and we have several more videos to come later as well. But without further ado, I'm gonna bring on Greg all the way from the US. Hi, Greg, how are you doing?
Great, Daniel. Great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this show with us. I know it's late at night where you are, but thank you for staying with us here.
Sure, my pleasure.
Right. So maybe I could just start off. How did you first get to know Jeremy, and what brought you to Singapore in that video?
Well, Jeremy, he's such a wonderful player. I'll never forget the first time I met him. I was visiting Singapore in 1995 with Judy Roberts, wonderful pianist, and my wife. And we played at this place called Somerset. It was in the Westin Hotel.
Yes.
And it was a wonderful club. And it was like a dream gig. We played 6 nights a week. It was 4 hours a night. We were there I think it was July 24th to November 18th, 1995.
Wow.
I have this memory thing. I remember dates and like I can remember like the exact stuff like that.
Wow.
And that was such a dream gig. And Jeremy came in, and he used to sit in sometimes with the band, and we just hit it off musically right away, of course. And we've been friends ever since. And after that gig in 95, I was there for like 4 months. And then I went back in 98 for a month and played some gigs with Jeremy and hung out. And then you remember in Jeremy, he put on the Jazz Festival around the year 2000, the first annual Singapore Jazz Festival.
Okay.
That was a wonderful thing too. And Jeremy brought me in for that. And we've done several collaborations. We did an album together when he was in Los Angeles around 2004. And it's called Only Trust Your Heart. And it's out on Jeremy's label. And that's a nice piano and sax duo thing, sort of like a Stan Getz, Kenny Barron kind of vibe to it. And Jeremy's just he's such a wonderful person and a wonderful player. And played with him in Singapore and in Bangkok. And as a matter of fact, I just played with his band at this Jazz Educator Conference in Reno, Nevada, a couple years ago. It was called the Jazz Educator Network. And I was part of Jeremy's big band, and he had Antonio Hart on lead alto, and he had some wonderful guys. He had actually some guys from Singapore there also. A bunch of people came in for that. So that was really nice. And I'm hoping to collaborate some more with Jeremy, in the future.
That's amazing. Yeah. So the first time when you came with your wife, was it just a duo? Or was it?
No, that was a quartet. Now that was Judy's. I think it was her third time there. It could have been her third or fourth time, but she had been going there since 1988. Wow. She followed a bass player named L.D. Young, who I think originally played in the room.
Yes.
At Somerset in the Westin Plaza Hotel, and also from Chicago. And Judy always went with a quartet. So there was a drummer who since has passed on, a wonderful guy named Greg Sergo, who played drums with us, and bassist Stuart Miller, who's still fine and living in Chicago. And that was the quartet. And we had just recorded a really successful album. As a matter of fact, it was released in Singapore. It was called Circle of Friends, and it was released in October of 1995. And Tower Records was selling it. It was actually the #1 jazz, jazz album at the time in Singapore. And I have such fond memories of Singapore in 1995. It was such a scene. We play the gig. All these musicians would come to hear us. And after the gig, we go out to like the hawker centers, which maybe if you're not from Singapore, you don't know what the hawker center is.
Yeah.
How would you describe that?
I would say it's like a huge market with many stalls and affordable prices or huge variety. Yeah, something that you guys have to come to Southeast Asia to really experience. If you don't know what we're talking about.
And the quality is so high of the food in Singapore is just like no place else in the world. The quality is just like incredible.
Yeah.
And so the musicians would come and they'd hear us at the gig, and then we'd say, all right, let's go to the hawker center. And so we'd go out most nights afterward and talk about music and just life and hang out at the hawker center. And it was just this big fan of ours, Dr. Edwin Wang. He would drive us to the hawker center. And at that time, the Bill Evans Riverside set had just come out, and he had it all on cassette in his car. So we listened to the Bill Evans trio on the way there and on the way back to the hotel. it was just like a magical time. And there were just so many great players there. Victor Gaskin, I think, just had come there around that time. We were hanging out with Victor, and I played with Christy Smith and bass, and Mei Mei Shum, she was there on piano.
Oh, wow.
And Audrey Tang, the young drummer, she was just getting started then. And Dan, we played with him. Louis Soliano.
Wow. And, yeah. I need to tag Mei Mei in this. Yeah, we play with her all the time. She's one of my favorite pianists right now, in fact. Yeah, I'll definitely share with her the link after this.
It was there's just so many great players in Singapore. It was such a great scene. And we would all go to each other's gigs and hang out and hear the other person play. And it was just a different time in the world, 1995.
It really was. And for me, I didn't grow up playing music in that, in those years, but I always hear so much about it, how amazing the scene was with all these live music venues. But now it's a totally different live music scene over here,
Yeah, there was like Dan Gomez, him, a great piano player. We used to go hear him play, and we'd go across the street to Raffles Hotel and hear music over there. We'd go to the Pan Pacific and hear Mario Sirio was over there with Jim Duchan, famous singer from the U.S. It was a real scene. I mean, there was just so much happening. And then during the day, I was free all day. Back then, in 95, I was writing my Stan Getz. I wrote 3 books of transcriptions of Stan Getz, who's one of my all-time idols. My favorite player, and really the reason I started playing tenor, because I loved his sound and his melodic way of playing. And I had already written 1 Getz book, and Hal Leonard contacted me and wanted me to do a couple of follow-up books. And so on that gig, since I was free all day to practice, I was practicing all day, transcribing Stan Getz, and then I played the gig at night, and then we go to the Hawker Center after the gig, and then I do the same thing again the next day. So it was just like a perfect thing. It was just like a perfect setup. So yeah, that's what I was doing back then. I was doing that. I was already teaching quite a bit by then. But I had not written any of these books that you see behind me. Those did not exist yet. The first one of those came out in 2004. Was the first one that I self-published.
Very nice. Yeah, Miss Lu says in the comments, wow, wonderful nuggets of live music anecdotes in Singapore. And actually, Russell Wong, hi Russell. He says Edwin Wang was his dentist.
Yes.
That's super. That's super.
Yeah,
cool.
We call him the jazz dentist.
And Russell says Don Gomez is living in Perth now. Wow. Nice. And thank you. And we have Javier here from Orlando, Florida. Thank you for being here with us as well. And yeah, Greg, I think, wow, I didn't realize, I knew we had connections between you and Singapore, but there's so much more than I thought.
I love Singapore. Yeah, I remember, matter of fact, I stayed with Dr. Ed when I went back in 1998. I actually lived at his house with him for a month.
Wow.
And he was teaching. He is a wonderful snooker player, and he was teaching me how to play the game. And so we put on some great jazz. He had a great stereo setup, and we'd listen to some great music in the background, and he'd teach me how to play. And so no, I have a lot of ties to Singapore. It's just something about the people and the food and the culture, and it's just I just love the place. And so does my wife. So does Judy. We often talk about Singapore. Sometimes we get what we call the Singapore flashback, and we remember something that someone said or did on that one of the many times that we were there, and it brings us right back there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We were talking earlier, and maybe one day, you can shift your whole business and play over here.
You never know.
Something to think about.
Anything's possible. Sure.
Yeah. But yeah, I definitely wanted to ask you, of course you're a very established musician and, based in Chicago and playing a lot of shows and concerts and all around the world. But, I think most people know you as an amazing jazz educator. How did that start off? Was it something that you consciously wanted to develop, or it happened by chance?
Well, I'm a real student of the music. I was one of these guys who practiced 8 to 10 hours a day. I did that for 12 years. when I started studying with one guy named Joe Daly, who was a Chicago guy. He was really my first serious teacher. And I was 16, and he would want me to do these incredibly difficult things. Like he'd say, all right, first of all, he said, when the first day I saw him, he said, you got to practice 5 hours a day minimum if you're going to study with me, only on what I give you. And he said, every week I had to have 3 standards. So he'd say, okay, this week you're going to do Just Friends, Moonlight in Vermont, and Wave. 12 keys. You got to be able to play the melody, solo on it, keep the time, hit all the changes, and unaccompanied by memory. And I said, what about my play-along records? And he's like, go home and throw them in the garbage, kid. You can't rely on those things. He's like, you got to know the changes. You got to be able to keep the time yourself. Now, I didn't throw them in the garbage. I actually think that they're very useful tools if used properly. Though I do think, like he said, a lot of people don't use them properly, and they just treat it sort of as a fancy metronome to kind of help them keep their place, and they're not internally hearing, so that's important. But I did what he asked, and one time I was having some difficulty with him. Like, well, how am I supposed to do all this? Like, you had to do all that, and then plus you had to have all your chords and your scales, full range of the horn, both directions, at an incredible speed, and all this other stuff you had to do. You also had to do every week either a Coltrane transcription, Sonny Rollins, or Charlie Parker every week. So you had 3 standards a week, a Coltrane solo, and all this stuff. I said, how am I supposed to do this? He said, there's no rules. He said, I don't care how you do it. I don't care if you have to go to another teacher. I don't care if you have to steal it from a recording. There's no rules. You do whatever you got to do. I just want you to show up next week and be able to do it. So I started going to the records. I'm like, well, gee, what does Sonny Stitt play on this tune for the changes? And I started figuring that out. It's like, well, what's Dexter Gordon do? And I started figuring that out, and then Stan Getz. And finally, I started bringing a tape recorder into the lesson and recording my teacher playing examples of how to play some of this stuff. And I would transcribe him too. And I'd show up the next week, and I'd play some of his own stuff right back at him. And he said, sounds good, man. He never said, where did you get that? And I never told him. It didn't matter. He's like, it's a language. You get it however and wherever. Now, that was very liberating to me, because up till then, I was in high school, and I had the mindset that you couldn't go on your own unless the teacher told you can go ahead in the next lesson or the next thing. You'd wait to be assigned something. And he's like, no, you hear something you like, you just take it. You don't have to wait for anybody's permission. You don't have to ask anybody. And that was so liberating. So I really became crazy about transcribing. I would transcribe 5 solos a day. I mean, I ended up doing about 600 solos. I finally had to stop doing it because I just enjoyed it so much that I needed to move past that and start developing my own thing, and started composing and started doing some different things. But it's one of the best things for developing your ear. That's how I really got in touch with the horn. And it did lead into my teaching thing, because, well, let's see, how I got into the teaching. I taught a little bit when I was, about 17, 18 years old. I used to work retail at a place called the Saxophone Shop. I sold saxophones in 1987 and 1988. This was a very famous store in Evanston, Illinois, suburb of Chicago, just about 10 miles north of Chicago. And I would also teach private lessons there. And I was also working a ton of commercial jobs, corporate gigs, weddings, parties, anything I could get. The thing is, back then, the bands were so loud, I noticed I started getting a ringing in my ears after these gigs. And sometimes it wouldn't go away for a long time. So I got in touch with an audiologist who came out to the gig to see what was going on. And he came out to one early, and I played just the saxophone. And he's like, oh, that's way too loud. You're going to ruin your ears. I said, wait till the band gets here. This is just me. Wait till they start putting microphones on the drums and stuff. So he was there. He heard the gig. He's like, oh, you got to get out of this situation. You're going to ruin your ears. You're going to have permanent damage. He said, do you really love doing this? You got to do. I said, really? I just want to play jazz. I just like playing acoustic jazz gigs. He's like, why don't you find a way where you can do that? Because you're going to damage your hearing if you keep playing all these top 40 gigs, And around that time, a band director at a local high school got in touch with me and asked me about teaching improv. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to do that. So I started teaching there. And one of my star students came out of that school, John Irabagan. You might have heard of him. He's a New York guy. He won the Monk competition around 2013. Yeah. I taught him from when he was a little kid. He was all freshman year through senior year of high school for John. And he was in a little suburb called Gurnee, Illinois. And I taught him, and the things were going so well at that school. The kids started playing so much better their improvised solos with the jazz band. Pretty soon I started getting calls from other band directors who heard about the progress that we were making there. And within a year, I had 8 schools and 65 students a week. I did that for 7 years. So I would teach, I always remember Wednesdays, because Wednesdays I had 18 people on Wednesdays. And so I'd wake up at 6 a.m. every day. I'd usually start teaching at 8. I'd usually teach 8 to 3, and then I'd drive to another school and teach from 4 or 4:30 until 8 or 9 at night. Now, with that many people, I had a real chance to develop a unique teaching system. And one of the things I found out was the people I was teaching had no theoretical background at all. They didn't know any music theory. I needed a way to explain really advanced concepts about music in a way that was non-technical, that they could understand the concept without having to go through 4 years of college, music theory and all that. Yeah. And I found a way of describing things. Sometimes it would be, about a flavor or a taste of something. Like I started talking about chords, and I was describing the difference between them. I said, it's not just letters. You talk about like a C, E, G, B, major 7 chord, or a C, E, G, B flat, a dominant 7 chord. And I said, it's not just the letters. There's like a flavor to this. And it's like every time we add a flat, it's changing the flavor. So if you can imagine C, E, G, B, and I'd have them play that and say, imagine that that's a very sweet apple, like a red apple, like a red delicious apple. And if we add a flat to that and we make it a C, E, G, B flat, it's not quite as sweet of an apple. Maybe it's like a Honeycrisp apple, something like that. Okay. And then we add another flat and we make it minor. So maybe now it's like, I don't know, maybe it's a Brayburn or something like that. And you keep adding flats. By the time you get to the full diminished chord, C, E flat, G flat, B double flat, that's like a Granny Smith apple. It's a green apple. It's very, very tart. And so what I started doing was I would compare, say, well, let's play the major 7 one. And when you hear me play this, I want you to tell me this is kind of abstract. Say, which apple would this chord taste like? This is synesthesia, which is a mixing of the senses, where you say something sounds like something tastes. Paul Desmond had a famous quote. He said, I always wanted to sound like a dry martini. And I always loved that quote. I always thought it was so cool that he said that, sounding like something tastes. So I play the major 7 chord, maybe on piano, and then I play the diminished 7 chord on piano. I say, all right, if these chords were apples, tell me, is it a red apple or is it a green apple? And I play it. And people could do it. They could imagine the flavor of it and the texture of the apple and all that. And that became a way of using not only their ear, but sort of it accessed part of the way they think it's sort of I call it a kinesthetic approach to teaching. It's like a feeling. It's like as soon as I say banana, you immediately can picture the color, the flavor, the texture, because you're experienced. You've tasted a banana before, so you can recall that. And that's what I found was one of the keys to the way that I teach. I have to connect with the person with something that they already have experienced, that they can relate the sounds to. If they could connect the sounds to something that makes sense to them, that's familiar, and that's not just academic in nature. Because to say, well, there's 105 chords, there's 60 different sounding chords, there's major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished, and here's the spellings, and just memorize this. That's what I call the academic approach. It's not incorrect, but you're not going to be able to, it doesn't have a personal meaning to you. It has to have some kind of feeling to you. It has to connect on a deeper level than on just an intellectual level. So that's why a lot of times I use taste, because everyone has their favorite foods and everyone can relate to flavors of things. It's like, this is my favorite flavor. I like this. Or it's like, I like this pizza. Why do you like that pizza? What is it about it that makes it great? But when you can start to figure that stuff out, then you start to develop these preferences musically And again, this is very different than what I found was the academic approach. I did, I have a degree from DePaul University, my bachelor's in jazz performance. I have a master's in education in jazz pedagogy from Northwestern University, both very highly respected institutions, great schools. But it's the academic approach. And what's kind of ironic is I don't teach at all the way that I was taught at those schools or the way that those classes said to teach the information. The information may be the same, but the way that I convey that to my students is completely different, because I know even if you can pass, and I knew this from school, you got a lot of kids in class, in jazz theory class, who are getting straight A's on their papers. You hear them at a club one night with no music in front of them, and they're not able to apply that theory. They don't sound all that great. Well, why is that? And then here's some guy who's just a street musician who's never gone to school, yet he can play great on the changes, and he's emotional, and he's connecting with the audience and interacting with the band members, and he's not intellectual in his head thinking, it's an altered dominant. I think I'm going to play the seventh motive of melodic minor. That doesn't have that feeling. My theory is that the older guys who I transcribed, a lot of them, they played out of sort of an emotional connection to the sound. Like they wanted to portray a mood or a feeling with a note. And maybe they wanted that to have some tension, so they'd arrive at a sharp 9 or a flat 9 or a sharp 11. But it meant something personal and very unique to them. It wasn't the way it's presented in the academic setting is sort of like, here's a chord, and here's a scale that goes with the chord, and all of these notes are acceptable. They're all equally acceptable, and you can play any of them at any time. And that's sort of like saying, when you take, letters of words or something and saying, well, here's a bunch of letters, and you can just put them in any order you want, and they'll all work. Well, not really. You'll get different words depending on the order in which you put the letters together. So it has to have intent behind it. I think one of the things the academic system, which I can understand why they want to do it, they want to try to help. They want to help. They're trying to help the student. And they're trying to help by giving them basically like the answers. Like, these are the notes that work. These are the notes that don't work. The thing is, you got to learn that stuff for yourself. And I'll give you another another food analogy. I was playing at a club, and a customer asked me if I wanted to have a piece of his anchovy pizza. Now, I'm not really into anchovy. I don't like, generally, I don't eat too much fish anyway, but I figured I would not like it. And he's like, oh, have you ever tried it? I'm like, no, but I don't. Oh, come on, try a piece. I'm like, okay. He gives me the piece with the most anchovies on it. I take a huge bite. I eat almost the whole piece in one gulp. And I'm like, oh my God, this tastes so awful to me. This is just terrible. But I tried it, and I experienced the flavor. And I know now when someone says, would you like some anchovies on that? I'm like, I hate anchovies. I cannot stand the taste of anchovies. It's totally gross to me. But if I had never tried it, I wouldn't know. Well, it's the same thing with these notes. When they tell you, oh, you don't play the fourth, it's an avoid note. Don't play this note because it clashes. You have to experience the clash for yourself and feel what it's like. And there are some times where you'll want that effect, but even if it's just to try it, to say, no, you don't like it, you have to try it. And I think part of the academic thing with giving you the answers before your ears actually hearing the sounds is it tries to eliminate that process. And that's a bad idea. You have to learn the flavors that you like and the flavors that you don't like, and you have to try each of them. And it just takes a while to figure out what you develop this sort of musical palate, and you want to be sort of like almost like a food connoisseur when it comes to choosing your notes. For people into wines, I'd say it's like you want to be like a connoisseur of notes, or a wine sommelier, someone who, and if someone says, oh, I want to be a wine sommelier, I got a half hour. Go ahead. Tell me how. It doesn't work like that. It takes a lot of years to develop the palate where you can taste something and say, that's a Rothschild 53. No, it was a 55. It was, and some people can really tell like that, So to develop that type of thing, it takes a lot of experience. And in the teaching, getting back to that, this way of teaching people, I'd play something and I'd have them try to just figure out what I did without telling them, and have them sing. I'd have them sing the note if they weren't getting it on the horn. And then when they would sing it, then I'd have them try to play it again, and then try to match it up to their hands. So if they go, ba, It's my F sharp on a tenor. And this is something I noticed in high school. The school bell, it rang for concert E. One day I noticed it. And so in class, I started, when I hear the bell, I just do my fingering for my F sharp on tenor. After a while, I could just go like this and I'd hear that pitch. And this got enhanced when I started transcribing, because with that, I started hearing the timbre of the note, not just the frequency of the note. And I got really fascinated with this, with hearing these sounds. And so I started telling students, one of the things you're going to have to do to really get good at playing is you have to have this internal sense of where the sound is, how the sound of it, and then your finger's job is to find the location of that sound when you pick up the horn. Okay, so that's a big deal. You got to hear it like that. Hearing it like that. Oh, I actually have a horn sitting here. Let me grab this. See if I'm playing it yet today. So if I play that, there's my F sharp. That's where I was at. Da 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 da, boo ba boo doo doo da da. Da da dee da 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 da. Boop be da. Da da doo doo dee. Da da doo doo dee. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio. It's exactly as I'm hearing it. Okay?
Yeah.
I worked a lot on that, and that's one of the things that I talk to with students. And none of them have been. Most of the people, by the time they get to me, now I taught at those schools. I taught at those 8 schools for 7 years. After that, I had enough demand for my private studio that I was able to get out of the schools and just have my own teaching studio and have private students. But by the time most people have come to me, they've already been through a lot of other teachers and not had a lot of success with learning how to improvise and how to play what they're hearing in their head. And when I started showing them these things, they would say to me things like, I had lessons for the last 10 years and no one ever said anything like that to me. I didn't even know that's what I was supposed to be doing. Everyone just told me to practice more scales and to just look at the Omnibook. And now the Omnibook's a great thing. It needs to be corrected. There's a lot of errors in it, but they need to put out volume 2 is much better. It was transcribed by a different guy, but I would start telling these people these things and have them practice these different ways, the way that I practice, which is to play what I hear. And if you're playing a note and it's coming out of your horn and you're not hearing it in your head, I call that empty note playing. You're not playing honestly. You have to truly hear the sound of the note, because the instrument can lie for you. Now brass players are better at this because they got to buzz their lip to the frequency, to the pitch. But with woodwinds, I was playing that F sharp, but what if I was doing thinking of that sound, but I was fingering this note? Well, this note would come out because the instrument will do it for me. But it's not true because that wasn't the note I was hearing. Then you got to get past that, where you're hearing the note in context of a chord, and this is where it really goes up. It's a pretty big leap, because now we're talking about not just hearing an F sharp, but hearing the F sharp as part of a bigger chord. Okay, so you're hearing it as a different piece. So for example, if I hear that F sharp as a sharp 9, totally different sound than if I was hearing it as the 3rd, on a major chord. There was just the 9th, a major 9th on a minor chord, right? So there's all these different ways of hearing it. And I always thought that was really fascinating. I call it hearing like a piano player. Piano player, you have the benefit of playing the root, the chord voicing, and the melody note all simultaneously. Well, you got to get where you're hearing like that on the saxophone. And that actually, that's going to bring up something in this book that I wrote. A lot of people don't know about this book, The Lobster Theory. Okay. Yeah. I'll tell you about the Lobster Theory in a second. But I want to show you something else that I talk, hearing the note in context. That's a big deal. All the top players, they can hear like this. This is what I'm always looking for. What's the difference? What's separating an intermediate player from a really advanced player? And this is one of the things. It's about the way that they hear it. Hold on, I just got to find the location of that page. You got to hear in context. You have to hear what it would sound like. Harmonic GPS, here it is. And this picture, this is illustrated by a guy named Mick Stevens, who's a famous cartoonist from the New Yorker. And this is what I call, here's how a student hears things, okay? There, can you see that okay?
Yeah.
That's the compass. He's playing a D, and in his head, he's hearing a D. And that's just like a compass telling you you're going north. What you need, what the pro player has, is this. I call this Harmonic GPS. And notice he's playing the same D is coming out of his saxophone, same note. But in his head, he's hearing it as the ninth of a C minor chord. And so that's all the difference in the world right there. That's if I had to say what's the difference between the way a pro hears and the way an amateur hears, that's it. The amateur plays a D and he hears a D. The pro plays a D and he hears. Any of those could be dozens of different chords. That's the difference. And it takes a lot of training and a lot of patience. It's a very specific type of training where I can just hit that D and I can hear that full context of the chord in my head while I hit that one note. It's sort of like you can do the same thing with words. It's like if you play word games, I like to play word with friends or Scrabble. I like those types of games. And you could take a note and, let's just take a letter A. Okay, we'll take it A. Now, a lot of people, you think, okay, it's a word with an A, so apple, right? That's got to be the word. Well, what if A was the second letter? Can you give me a word where A is the second letter?
All right, banana.
Banana, or your name, Daniel. Right,
Yeah.
okay. What if A was the third letter?
Wow, now I gotta start thinking. Wow.
How about fraternity? F-R-A, right?
Yeah.
How about if A was the fourth letter? How about a word like freak? F-R-E-A-K.
Wow.
Or what if A, so that like there right there. So when A, apple, that's like A was the root of the chord. Okay. Banana. Well, there are a couple of them in there. Let's use your name instead because only one A. Daniel. That's like it's the third of the chord. It's the second one. Okay. When I said, or how about fraction? F-R-A, right? So it's the third letter. That would be like the root, the third. That'd be like the fifth of the chord. If the A were the fourth letter of the word, it'd be like the seventh of the chord. So if what was at the very end of the word? Could you think of a word that ends maybe in an A? That's kind of a hard one.
Wow.
How about a word like trifecta? Something like that, but that's how you have to, what I'm doing with the words right now, which non-musicians can do that. You have to do the equivalent to that, but with your notes, where you can imagine the sound of the note being the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh, the ninth. Could be the sharp nine, could be the flat nine, could be anything. Any note could be anything. And getting that concept across to the students, once they get that, it's so much more fun to play because now you're not, it's creative. You get to do all kinds of different things with it and you get to experiment. You don't have to have a book for that type of thing. It's something you want to explore these sounds on your own and you listen to the way it sounds. Now, it's kind of hard to do on a saxophone because you have to imagine the sound of the full chord. So when I was doing it a moment ago, I was arpeggiating the chord. You could also do it on piano, though. Play the chord on piano and sing the melody note. However you want to do it, you've got to get those sounds in your ear. Well, anyway, this became a big part of my teaching concept, along with a bunch of other stuff. I was so fortunate. I studied with Joe Henderson, who was just a genius. Wow. And Joe's lessons were really interesting. They were nonverbal. He wouldn't say anything. Now, I talked to Joe all the time because we used to go out to dinner after his gig all the time whenever he'd play in Chicago. So, we were friends and we'd talk all the time. But during the lesson, he would only play piano and he'd play something and I had to figure it out on the saxophone. And it would get longer and longer. He'd play a phrase and it'd get longer. And finally, it'd get so long and I'm having trouble with it. And one day I said, "Hey, Joe, can I just grab some paper and write this out?" And he said, "No, you can't." I said, "No?" He said, "Write it down in your mind right now." He says, "When you tell me you're going to write it down, that means you're going to get to it later." He said, "I want you to get to it right now." And he says, "As a matter of fact, this lesson is over when you can't remember anymore." And so I had no idea I had the ability to memorize that much stuff in one, just standing there listening to it and figuring it out. And you keep adding to it, and it went really long. I saw Joe a year later for the next lesson, and he went to the piano and said, Greg, here's where you left off. And he went to the piano and played up to where we were a year ago. So guy's a genius, you know, he's got one of those minds. But that left such a strong impression on me that I changed my way of practicing. Now, I used to practice 8 hours a day, but the way I started practicing after those lessons with Joe, and he never told me to do this, but I just saw the importance of developing your memory. I developed this concept of playing that I call the rotation, and that's where you do slightly different versions of things as you're going through different keys. So most people will just play the same idea and they'll put it in 12 keys. Well, I started doing things where I would do something different as the key is changing, okay? So let's say I'll give you a little demonstration of that. Say you're working on chords and you're working on lower neighboring tones or something like that. Lower neighboring tones, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a half step below the chord tone, right? So say I'm going to do it on a dominant chord. I put it on the root, right? Da, 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 da. Okay, I'm going to move it up. I moved it up to the third, okay? I'm going to move it up again. That's the lower neighbor to the fifth. Different sound. I'm going to move to the seventh. So you could do them all, or you could do them individually, like I did before. Each one has a unique sound. Now, a lot of people would just practice these and they would do it the same way in every key, which is okay. That's sort of a basic level to get them. But if you really want to work on your memory, your musical memory and your ear, here's what I do. See if you could tell what I'm doing. I hate to put you on the spot. You'll be able to tell. Okay. All right. So here it is. I'm going to go through the cycle. What did I do? Could you tell?
No, actually.
Okay. Here's what I did. I put the lower neighbor on the root on the first chord, but I put it on the third in the next chord. Then I put it on the fifth in the next key, on the B flat 7. Okay, then in E flat, I put it on the 7th. So you're getting your ear to notice. You know, when you put a lower neighbor on a chord tone, it's like you're shining a harmonic spotlight on that. This is a way of directing your listener's ear to a particular location. If I just play, they're equal, okay? But if I go, it's like the fifth has a giant harmonic spotlight on it because there's some new activity happening there. So this is a very powerful thing to be able to control where the listener is paying attention. Sort of like someone who does a magic show. They know how to get the audience to look over here, even though they're doing something over here. It's like you can control, you know, where their attention, where their focus is. So by doing this, you're developing this ability to keep track of slight differences in details as you're soloing. It's going to come into play when you're actually soloing, because you need to be able to keep track of an idea and get back to it. You know, and that's one of the big differences. Again, I'm always looking for the difference between the non-professional player and the professional. The professional player has such a good musical memory that they can keep track of something that they played, even though it was off the top of their head. And they can come back to it and refer to it again. Okay? So they'll have a little theme. Here it is again. There it is up there. I moved it up, but it was that do-da, do-da. That was my theme. It was no big deal, but I could play around, do other things. But then when I come back to that, it has a unifying effect. It has a very good effect on the solo. It kind of ties the whole thing together. And this is a way of playing really like a composer, where you're like composing ideas. And you just happen to be doing it off the top of your head. Well, it's almost like a memory recall button in your head, where you can come up with something you played a little while ago. And I call it references. References are similar to sequences. A sequence is where you just repeat the idea. Okay, that's what I call direct sequence. But maybe you'll do something what I call indirect. So there was some other information in between, but I went back and developed it a little further. So it's sort of like putting something on a shelf. Oh, this is one of the other analogies. This one's an elaborate one. I'll share it here, but this is an elaborate one. I don't know how I thought of it. That's the other thing. These analogies all happened while I was teaching a real lesson. I didn't sit in a room say, today I'm going to make up analogies for how to play jazz. It didn't happen like that. It was a situation where I was teaching somebody, and for whatever reason, they were having difficulty with a concept, and somehow something about that person, I could take something that they either said or something that they liked. I would talk to these people and find out what their hobbies were, what they liked, what food they liked, where they were from. I got to know them. And then I would come up with some analogy based on something particular to them. And this one is kind of off the wall, about keeping something in place. And this is comparing an amateur player to a pro. Now, it's getting the idea of, what do you call those guys? They're always in a box. They don't say anything. They're like a mime, right? A mime, like the famous guy, Marcel Marceau from France. They act like they're in a box. It's invisible, and they act like they're they're pulling on a rope, or they're fighting against the wind and all that stuff. Okay, imagine that. That's the setup. It's a mime. He's got an imaginary apple. Shines it on his shirt, takes a bite out, puts it up on this imaginary shelf right over here. Then he goes back and he's folding towels, or he's doing whatever those guys do. And after a while, he grabs that apple right where he left it, takes another bite, and he moves it over here. Okay. And then he's doing other things and then he grabs it again, takes another bite, moves it right in the center of the shelf this time. Okay. That's mime A. Here's mime B. Mime B is the amateur player. Apple, takes a bite, throws it over his shoulder, does some other stuff. Another apple, takes another bite, throws it over there. Okay, he keeps doing this. At the end of his routine, the second mime, he's got like 30 apples, each with one bite taken out. The professional, he's just got an apple core. He's eaten the whole apple. That's like a developed solo by a professional. And there was this other thing that you had to take the next bite of the apple before it started turning brown. So there's a time proximity thing too. So while you're doing it, that idea is only going to stay in the memory of the audience so long. So you got to get back to it to develop it a little further. You can't wait forever, but you got to kind of keep it in the back of your mind. So that image of here's the apple, now it's over here, now it's over here, even though you're doing other things, knowing in the back of your mind where it's located. It's sort of like that. That's what it's like. I'm keeping track. Like people will say, oh, what scale were you thinking of when you played that? I'm like, I'm never thinking of scales when I solo. I'm thinking of a melody. I'm trying to create a melody. I am hearing the changes, and I'm hearing a lot of times people see me going like this. Each finger represents a voice leading note, okay? So I'm trying to connect the chords in a really smooth way, and a lot of times I find you can get a good melody by doing something like this. So this, if I can convert this to sound for the listeners, because I know what this sounds like, but no one else does. So when I do that, I'm thinking maybe I'll take like a 2-5-1. Right? So I'm doing something like that. That's it. Right there. And then the next chord. Okay, and then the next one. So I'll go like. So that turns into like. I put the roots on. Now I can create a melody. I was using all 4 notes. I can just use 2 notes and go like would be a nice melody. Maybe I'll go. And it creates this sort of invisible musical template. So I can have all these big skips, but I'm hearing like this. I'm hearing all these voice leading. It's very much like hearing like a piano player who's really good with his voicings, who knows how to connect things in a smooth way. You know, to get that conveyed to a horn player, That's something that most horn players never even considered that they would need to know. Most horn players are like scales, arpeggios, articulation, those are all important things. But to me, like, there's two issues. There's the issue of the instrument, learning how to be a good saxophonist, very important. Proper breathing, tone production, articulation, intonation, all that stuff. But then there's becoming a musician, which is a whole separate thing. And to learn how to be a musician, how to hear things and how to interact with other players when you're playing, how to work on your memory, that your memory work got to be a part of your practice. And when I teach, currently I have a load of about 30 Skype students, 30, 35. And a big part of my teaching is the memory part of it, teaching you how do you remember all this stuff? It's so much information. And the key really to the whole thing is to start to trust your ear. And you have to be playing what you hear. You have to trust the ear. I teach so many people, and a lot of these people are brilliant. They're lawyers, doctors, surgeons, brilliant people, architects. And because they're so smart, it actually kind of works against some of them because they think that they can use their intellect to make up for the fact that they don't really hear anything in their head specifically. They think that they can just read a bunch of theory books and apply all this information. And since they're so smart, they're just going to sound great. It just doesn't work like that. I don't care how smart you are. You got to hear. If you don't hear or taste like that sharp 9, it's just like I said, tasting the anchovies. It doesn't, I couldn't have imagined how gross those things would have tasted, but I tasted them. I know. You got to try it at least once, whatever it is, just try it. And, and that was many years ago. Now, that was probably 40 years ago. I might try them today and say, you know what, these are kind of cool. They're salty. I like it. Your tastes change as you grow up. You just like some people, I'll say, oh man, did you check out this Wayne Shorter album or something? They're like, oh man, I don't like that. Like, you're not ready yet. When your ear reaches a certain point, you're going to hear this and say, oh man, I hear something going on there. But if it's too early, then, it won't make sense to you. So it's sort of like going back and rereading a book that you read that maybe was beyond you when you were in college or high school. And then you reread it 20 years later and you're like, oh man, I didn't realize all this stuff was in here. Like there's all this subtext stuff happening. And one of the ways that you know that you've achieved a new level of hearing is like when I listen to a recording that I've heard for decades and I start to hear something new in there that I didn't notice before, I'm at a new level. That's it. That's how you know. It happens. It's interesting. It happens sometimes very gradually. But then all of a sudden one day you're listening to something, you're like, wait a minute. The bass is playing the seventh on beat 1 of that measure. How come I never noticed that before? I've heard this thing for 10 years. Well, it's because now your ear has reached that new level and you're able to perceive things that you couldn't before. Just like that person who drank the wine could tell you it was the Rothschild 53. That didn't just happen automatically. It took a lot of training, and you can't force it either. You can only go as fast as your ear can handle it. I remember once I had a student who he stopped the lesson because after 2 weeks he said, well, Greg, I got to stop these lessons because I set this goal for myself. If you couldn't get me to be able to hear a sharp 11 in my head after 2 weeks, I was going to quit. I'm like, well, that's just not all that realistic of a goal. You can't, see this beard? I wanted to grow this when I was 13. I couldn't do it. Didn't matter how much I wanted to. I wasn't ready. I could shave it off now. It'd come back in a week. So your ear, it has to be ready. You got to take the time with it. You can't force the ear. If you try to do too much with the ear, then it gets overwhelmed. And it's just sort of pouring, 10 ounces of water in a 6-ounce glass. It just overflows. It's not going to work like that. But the ear, as it starts getting hold of these concepts, it will get deeper and deeper. And you'll start to really get this ability to hear these sounds. And it makes playing so much more fun. And it makes remembering things so much easier, because you're just remembering the sounds of it. The latest analogy I'm using that I just came up with about a month ago was I was teaching someone and I was playing something. And it's like, these notes are sort of like cars that I'm parking on the street. I drive a lot, so I like a lot of driving analogies. And it's just like, oh, I parked this car over on this street and I know it's headed north. And this other car, it's in a parking garage. And I'm on the 7th floor. And as I'm playing the solo, it's like those notes are in these locations, and I can hear them. They're like real locations to me. They're very easy to locate. So it's just like remembering where you parked your car. It's a different part. I think it's a different part of your brain that you access than saying, like I just taught a guy, and he was working on like Autumn Leaves, and he's like, I was trying to figure out if I could just play like the harmonic minor scale through the whole thing, so I could just do that for the whole solo and not have to deal with any of the chords. And I'm like, and he's like, I listened to Miles Davis, and he just played his D for the whole thing. And I said, well, his D, he's on the ninth. They said that'll work for every chord. I said that'll work for every chord. And I went through the piano and I played the D on the top, and I'm like, it's the ninth of C minor, it's the 13th of F7, right? It's the third of B flat major, it's the 7th of E flat major, it's the 11th of A half diminished. And I was like, yeah, Miles knew what he was doing when he did that. He said he kept going back. He didn't play it the whole time, but he kept going back to it. I was like, it's because he was hearing it. He heard it, and he heard that it sounded good, and he liked that sound, and he hit it very deliberately. But if he was just thinking, I'm going to play this scale over this chord, and I'm playing a different scale over this chord, you're so distracted worrying about what scale to play, or even worse, an avoid note. Ooh, it's like, don't play the fourth over a major chord. That's like saying to you, don't think of a blue elephant right now. Okay? Don't think of a blue elephant. Are you thinking of a blue elephant? Don't do that. Yeah, so when you do that, you just draw attention to it anyway. So you can't play by means of avoidance. That's like saying, if we were going to translate that to speech, let's avoid the letter H for the next 3 minutes. We can't say a word with an H in it. Well, think about the difficulty you would have speaking.
Yeah.
Because you can't say a word. Now you got to go through and think, gee, does that word have a letter H in it? Well, now your mind, you can't even focus on your idea anymore because you're so distracted by this rule that's in place. So I think the same thing is true when you're trying to play by a set of rules you learned about how scales fit with the chords. Now, that's not saying scales are bad or anything. They're great. You got to know them. It's part of the language. But there's a way that fluent speakers of the language speak that's different than someone who's just starting to learn the language. And you've got to now, watashi wa nihongo ga skoshi wakarimasu. Anata wa? You speak any Japanese?
No.
Okay. So now, I never studied Japanese, but I worked for a Japanese club owner, and I toured Japan like 5 times. And one time with Brecker, which was a life-changing thing, because it was like we were on the same festival. I didn't play with his band, but I got to be friends with Michael on that tour. That was in 2002. And while I was there, we're playing all these places, and I loved the sound of the language. And every town we go to, we did 16 cities in 18 days. So it was a crazy tour. It was really fun. And I started learning how to pronounce everything. And I learned it from people in Tokyo. So I don't say that much, but what I do say, I can pronounce it really well because I didn't learn it out of a textbook in a classroom. I learned it from actual speakers. So, watashi no enso wo tanoshindu kudasai. That's, we hope you enjoyed our music. That's what that means. And so I know what I'm saying. I'm not just speaking phonetically, but it's all in the inflection and in the sound of it. And it's the same thing when it comes to playing music. It's you got to have that inflection, and it's like a stylization. What I think of is like the scales and chords, they are what I call non-stylized. They're just like bricks, 2x4s. You're going to build a house. You got basic things, bricks and 2x4s, but that's not yet stylized. So I mean, we're playing the same notes that Bach and Mozart used, right? If we're just playing tonally, we're playing in the key system, major keys, minor keys. And what makes it different? Well, it's the style. Charlie Parker had a style. Dexter Gordon had a style. Lester Young had a style. They're all working with the same notes and pretty much the same harmony, though it got more outside. It got more dissonant. And you get into the later stuff, into the 60s and 70s. But basically, what makes it so different is the stylization. And the sound is what's unique, too. Everyone has their own sound. The pitches themselves are the same. Think about how much you'd lose if, say, you just took a bunch of great solos. Say you take 5 guys, take Lester Young and Charlie Parker and Sonny Stitt and Stan Getz and John Coltrane, and you ran that solo just through a synthesizer, and they sound the same. You'd get their notes. The lines would sound good, but you don't get their character, their tone, and all their inflection and the way they're tonguing, and maybe, you're gonna get Maybe you're getting that kind of Sonny Rollins vibe, very aggressive articulation, really digs in, or maybe you're getting more like a, maybe like a Ben Webster, kind of an old school kind of vibe to it, or you're getting, maybe a Gene Ammons kind of thing. Very different. Or maybe you're getting the gets. Each one has got his thing. And I spent a lot of time studying these guys so I could just play like me. I'm a combination of everyone that I've listened to in my whole life and studied. And that's what you hear when you watch that video of me playing. I can hear my influences, and there's a lot of them. Pretty much I studied everyone because I just love the music so much. Like I always say, I'm a student of the music, and I always will be. I didn't invent the language. It existed before I was born. I mean, Lester Young was playing beautifully in the 1930s, like before my father was born. So, the language is there, and you don't have to invent it. It exists already. You can come up with your way of doing it, but it's like the alphabet already exists. We've got our 26 letters. It's great. It's so great that we've got that. I was working on my piano playing the other day, and I'm reading through Bach inventions on the piano. Like, my God, these are beautiful pieces. How did he do it? And it's like, and then I go transferring some of that stuff to the saxophone, and then I'll put that in one of my solos, some of that stuff that I learned from that. So it's just, that's the other thing too. I listen to all different types of music. I listen to classical music. I don't listen to much new stuff as far as pop music goes, but I listen to 60s, 70s, a little bit of 80s, I guess, because I'm older. I'm 53. So a lot of people, how old are you?
I'm turning 33 this year.
Oh, how sweet. You.
I definitely wanted to ask you about Stan Getz, and just now you're demonstrating about Stan Getz. You did 3 transcription books. I guess what did you learn after, transcribing all of this Stan Getz? What was it? Any, nuggets into, the way he plays and the way he approaches improvisation?
He's so natural. He has a very organic way of developing an idea. He lets it naturally evolve. He's not a guy who uses a lot of licks or patterns. He has a few, but not that many. Whereas someone like Sonny Stitt, who's another favorite of mine, you could figure out more patterns based on what he's doing. Getz, he creates these musical events. It's like he's telling a story, and they have to happen in a particular order, the way that he does it. Getz is a master at editing his ideas down to just essential notes. And he's got a ton of technique. He can play incredibly fast, but he doesn't just show off how fast he can play the saxophone. It's always something melodic. It always has to make sense. To me, he's kind of like Mozart or something like that. These perfectly formed solos, perfectly balanced. Getz does this thing that I end up calling the snake. The snake is a smooth way of transitioning when one chord is changing to another chord, where you don't interrupt the flow of the idea and you make it a different idea. As a matter of fact, where is it? Here's my book. The snake is one of the analogies in the Lobster Theory. I'll show you that one. There's a picture of the snake. The snake, it's a little abstract. I don't know how I came up with it, but it came to me one day when I was playing. I remember I was teaching a student, and we were talking about it. And I was like, it's like a snake. Its body is just, here it is. Here's the snake around the racks. That's what most people do. Okay. And here's the snake. This goes the opposite way as I'm showing it. There's the snake over the racks. And you see how his body takes the shape of the rack? In that, like the actual body of the snake takes the shape. And they're both good. But the other way, this is what most people do. They do this one. No, they do this one. Everything's reversed. It's like a mirror. Everything, they do this one. But the snake over the racks, I'm going to demonstrate the difference. So if you say you're playing C minor to B minor, right? and you're going, that's your idea, okay? That's the snake. So C minor, and then B minor. And that's fine. That's what most people would do. Not Getz. Getz would do stuff like this. So I changed keys midstream without stopping. I kept the idea moving up, but I made it transpose to fit the B minor chord. Even though I was no longer starting at the root, I was starting in a different location. Getz is a master of this. He makes it, that's one of the reasons why his stuff sounds so smooth, is because he can immediately transform any idea and make it fit any chord without interrupting the melodic flow of the idea. And that's a tall order. That is not an easy thing to do. He does it so effortlessly that you don't even notice it's happening. It's so smooth, his transitions. The other thing he does, he's got incredible breath control. He plays these incredibly long phrases. And when I first started trying to play along with him, I couldn't even keep up. I'd have to take a breath or two to match one of his phrases. Wow. Right? So you take a tune, maybe someone's going to play, take a ballad. They're going to play Moonlight in Vermont, maybe they're going to play. Okay, that's all those breaths. Getz wouldn't do that. Getz would do, I'll see if I can do it. Something like this. Okay.
Wow.
One breath.
And he used incredibly hard reeds as well, right?
He used very hard reeds, 4s and 5s and stuff. So now I met Getz. I've got his voice on an answering machine tape. I once sent an audition tape to Stanford University for one of their summer jazz courses, and they knew I was a big fan of Stan's, and they gave him the tape. So one day I came home in 1989 or something like that, and there's Stan Getz's voice on my answering machine tape. Said, "Greg, this is Stan Getz. Give me a call." And I called him, and he said, "Hey, you sound great, man. I heard your audition tape for the school." And he was so nice. And I ended up going out and having dinner with him one night at a fundraiser for the university. And I handed him this huge stack of transcriptions that I had done, about 150 of his solos. And he was real impressed with them. And he said, "Are you coming to New York to see me?" It was going to be the last time he played at Carnegie Hall. And I'm like, "Yeah, I already got my ticket." He said, "I'll put your name on the list. Come to my dressing room." And I remember I walked in there, and there's all this security. And I'm like, "Look, I'm a friend of Stan Getz's. He said I can go to his dressing room." And they're like, "Sure, kid, right." I'm like, "Really?" And the guy goes away, and he comes back. He's like, "You're right. You're on the list. Come on, follow me." And he takes me to his room, and he had gone out to lunch. So I was just there by myself in Stan's room. There was his horn right there, and he comes back from lunch. He says, "Oh, Greg, you're here." And we just started talking and hanging out, and he's trying reeds, and we're just talking. Then the show goes on. That was the day before his European tour. I think the last European tour he did. Well, he did one more short one, but that was in June. I think it was June 29th, 1990. He died June 6th of 91. And he said, I said, "Stan, I really want to study with you. I'm going to transcribe you and everything." He says, "Look, I'm back from this tour in December. Come out to Malibu in December, and we'll hang for 2 weeks, and we'll do lessons." And I did. At the same time, that's when I was studying with Joe Henderson around that same time. I went to Joe's house. I had my lesson with Joe. And matter of fact, here, I'll show you this too. I got this right here. It happens to be here. I'm talking about that time period. Here it is. Here's me and Joe Henderson in front of Joe's house. And Joe signed it. It was 1990, August of 90. Wow. But by that time, when Stan got off that tour, he was just not well. He just was feeling so ill that he said, "You know what? Let's do it next summer when I'm in better shape." And he passed away June 6th. So then I was just so devastated. And that's when I got in touch with Hal Leonard, because Stan and I were going to put out those transcriptions together. And I had helped a guy named Frank Mantooth with his one of his books of reharmonized standards for the Hal Leonard Company. And so my name was already in one of their books, and I got in touch with them. I told them the whole story. I said, look, I've got these transcriptions. I've got like over 100 that I've done, 150 get solos. Do you want to do a book? And they said, yeah, they're interested. So we did it, and we put it out together, and then it did so well, we ended up doing 2 more. Now, fast forward a few years, and I figured, well, they'd had so much success with these Gets books. And I did one other book for them, too, another transcription book with like various artists. Like, they were hard ones. Coleman Hawkins and Wardell Gray and Zoot Sims. They were all in this one book. And I had been writing these etudes for my students. And that's the beginning of one of them, called Halstead Street. All my etudes are named after streets in Chicago. And that was just sort of, I didn't know what to call them. You know, I didn't think I should call it etude number 1 or etude number 2. I was like, well, that's kind of generic, and Lenny Niehaus already did that. And then if it's based on like A Train, you could call it Take the B Train or something. But I was like, that's kind of corny. Then I started thinking, well, Green Dolphin Street on Broadway, people like things with street names in them. And I was like, I'm from Chicago. If nothing else, people are going to remember this because, oh, it's that book of sax etudes with street names from Chicago, even if they didn't know who I was. So it was sort of a marketing thing, but it caught on and people really liked it. But that was one of the etudes that I wrote. And I sent it to Hal Leonard, and I'm waiting and waiting for them to approve it. And they're kind of dragging their feet on it. And finally, they ended up rejecting it. And right around that was 2002. I was on that tour I told you about in Japan with Michael Brecker. I told Michael, I said, Michael, I'm kind of afraid. He said, what are you doing? What are you doing these days? You know, tell me what's going on in your life. I'm like, well, I've written these really cool bebop etudes, and I'm trying to get Hal Leonard to put them out, but they just rejected it. And he's like, I want to hear them. He said, send it when we get back to the States. Send it to me. So I sent it to him along with a recording of me playing it. And he called me the next day, said, Greg, these are fantastic. I love them. He said, don't change anything in them, because Hal Leonard was talking about making them easier or watering them down or making them work for other instruments or something. By the way, my relationship with Hal Leonard is fine. They're actually my European distributor now for these books that I publish. It was the best thing they ever did was not publish that book, because I started Michael said, start your own company. I'm going to tell people about it. And he did. He told everybody. And then another one of my teachers, James Moody. Well, I was studying with Moody at that time, and I gave him the book, and he's like, he immediately, Moody could sight read anything. He could open up a book and sight sing exactly what it was. And he's like, oh man, these are really nice, Greg. He started telling other people about it. I started getting letters from people around the country asking about this book. And I ended up, and when it first came out, it didn't have a play along. One of my old teachers, a guy named Mark Colby, said, hey, Greg, people would really like to hear you play these things, to hear how you phrase them and your articulation. And why don't you add some extra courses so you can solo on the thing after you're done with the etude? I'm like, that's cool. I'll do that. And then I saw Liebman, who was another one of my teachers, Dave Liebman. I've been so blessed. These are the best guys in the world. And Liebman used it in a lecture he did just about straight ahead bebop playing. And he's like, this is a great book. He gave me an endorsement for it and just said it's got all the enclosures and voice leading and common tone usage that's part of that style. And so all these people started talking about it. I sent it into Saxophone Journal, which I missed. That was a really cool magazine. And to review it. And they liked it so much, David Dempsey, that he contacted me and they hired me as a writer for the magazine. So gave it a great review. That got the word out. And then I started sending out postcards to let people know about the thing. And it ended up doing really well. The first year, it sold like 2,500 copies. And then people started saying, hey, why don't you write a duet book? And I'm like, okay. So duets came out in 2006. So 2004 was Etudes Volume 1. And then duets in 2006. And then a Volume 2 of Etudes in 2007. And then, you know, they're pretty advanced. Those etudes are not that easy. The tempos are fast. I mean, I wrote them to be something that was professional level. One of the pet peeves I always had as a student was I hated playing out of a book that I thought didn't sound like what a pro would play. Like I thought, oh, this sounds like something a student would play. Even if you're an advanced player, you're going to sound like a kid if you play this because it's kind of corny or something. Like they're teaching you how to count an eighth rest, and they keep repeating the same idea over and over or something. And it always bugged me. So I was like, no, I think that's doing a disservice to the student. Like the student deserves to hear the highest level of music quality. Even if they're a beginning instrumentalist and they don't have a lot of technique, they deserve, because you're training them as musicians, not just sax players. You're training their ear. So when I write something, if I wrote another book in 2009 called Jazz Phrasing, and that goes, there's a piece in there that goes. So when you hear that, you're learning about taking a theme and sequencing it and learning how to balance it properly. Like that was the original, which I call the model. Now, sequence number 1, we repeat the model. I'm going to repeat it one more time. Now we're going to move on. That is really well balanced. Now there is some room. You can do just 2 times, the original and the model in one sequence, or you could do it as many as 4 times. But if you do it too much, it gets too predictable. If you don't do it enough, then it's too hard to follow. My idea is like the listener is they're subconsciously guessing at what you're going to do next. If they're right more than half the time, they're going to be bored because you're too predictable. But if they're right less than half the time, then they're lost because they can't follow you. And so you got to kind of walk the line. You got to be right at that part. They sort of were expecting it, but maybe it's a little different than they thought. So it's got to be plausible. So this idea of developing these ideas, the sequence thing, if I just go, well, that's not very satisfying because it feels like the idea wasn't completed yet. So you've got to have that. Now you can do something like this. You can do that. That's a little more advanced. That's what I call indirect sequence. So you start out with the idea, you make it clear, you can go away from it, but then you got to come back. And now to do that type of thing, you have to have a very good memory, musical memory. You got to be able to keep track of what you're doing. Getz was such a genius at this. I would hear him play something, and this was his solo on Invitation. This was from 1975 on an album called The Master. When I first heard it, I was like, oh, he's playing this same lick a lot of times. It's a long solo. When I transcribed it, yeah, it was the same lick, but it was on beat 2, the first chorus. It was on beat 3, like in the next chorus. Then it was on beat 1 in the next chorus. Like he's shifting it over. He never did it the same twice. And I was like, man, what control this guy has. It's like he can keep track of so many layers of things at once. So that kind of stuff, that's what I'm trying to teach, my students. That like most people, you would never guess that that's the type of training you need. I sure didn't know that, even though like Joe Daly said, get it however you have to get it. These are the things you need. He didn't teach like that. He was a real old school kind of teacher. He would say, figure out whatever you got to do, just do it. Well, I've got a lot of students, if I figure it out and do whatever you got to do, they'd never come back for a second lesson. They're like, well, that's why I came to you, because I don't know how to do it. I need your help. Well, so my whole teaching style is it's based on people like that, people who've gone to a lot of teachers. They've got a whole closet full of books on how to play jazz or how to improvise. None of it has worked. And now they don't even trust their ear because they think they're not talented enough to do this. It's not true. They've just been like training the wrong way. They haven't been doing it. They're not setting themselves up to succeed because they're not training with the right type of, equipment, basically. And that gets me into this thing. That's a good segue, actually, to this other video we set up. Yes. I needed to find a way. I love teaching, but at 30 students a week, sometimes more, there's only so many hours in the day. And I needed a way to be able to teach without being there all those hours, so I can actually tour and travel and compose and go in the studio and do these other things. And, YouTube's very popular. Several years ago, I started making little YouTube videos. I just shot them kind of on an iPhone. I didn't think much of them. Stuck them up there. Maybe you saw a couple of those. Yeah. Well, about 2.5 years ago, I got the idea that I wanted to be a little more formal about it and actually form an online course of study with me. Like if you were studying with me at a university, what I would show you, or what I would show you if you were coming to me privately, but it was through the video format. And I've created 175 lessons and counting, because I'm still putting more stuff up there. And it's like I'm your coach. It's just, as a matter of fact, this is the background of some of the videos. And it's just like what you've seen me do here. I'll talk and I'll say, here's the lesson today. We're going to talk about this. And I'll play an example. It's like, and here's how I thought about that. And here's how I practiced it. And here's some things you can do. And then I'll record it. Then I'll watch the whole thing and I will take detailed notes, and I'll even transcribe what I played. I'll enter it on Finale, put it for C instruments, B flat and E flat, and upload it there. And you can subscribe to the site. Actually, most of my private students are actually members of the video lesson course, because it keeps them on task, on target, in between their lessons with me. Because most of these people go once every couple weeks. And you can play right along with me. You can match my style and my tone. And it's just a great resource. And so there's different categories: scales, chords, licks, patterns. I even go into some pretty detailed analysis of some of the etudes and the things that I've written. One of the latest things I've been doing, I call melodic embellishment lessons, where I take one of my simpler pieces, like from the phrasing book, and I'll show you how you can use that melody and then incorporate extra notes into it to kind of dress it up and turn it into your own solo. And so it's really an incredible resource. I've made it really affordable. You can go to gregfishmanjazzstudios.com and check it out. Did you want to run that little, I've got a 1.5-minute little demo.
Yeah, I'm going to share this link here first in the comments, where you guys can find out more information and subscribe as well. And then I'm going to play the video. Right, here we go. Oh, hold on.
Got an echo.
Hello, this is saxophonist Greg Fishman, coming to you from my home in Chicago, Illinois. Today I'm going to take you on a virtual tour of my new video lesson subscription course. Right down here on the screen, it says click here to download PDF lesson materials. Click on that, and you're going to see it's going to go into your download folder. These are lessons that you're going to want to go to over and over again. The way I look at it, each of these lessons is sort of like a piece of equipment in a gym. I'm basically like your coach, and I'm guiding you through all of these things while you're playing. So having your horn out while you're doing the lessons is really a benefit. By hearing me play, you're going to have a great example of the tone and the articulation and the swing feel and all of the elements of the style. I hope that you've enjoyed this virtual tour of the video lesson subscription site, and I'm looking forward to working with each of you very soon. Take care.
Right. Yeah, that was a really nice introduction to this virtual course. And 175 videos, that's really, really amazing and counting.
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. I had someone who recently subscribed, and then they canceled after a month. I'm like, what's going on? Like, oh, I watched all 175 videos in like 2 days. I'm like, that's not the way it works. That's like you join the gym and you go on the treadmill for 2 days straight.
Yeah.
You're not going to get benefit like that. This is the thing. You got to go back and over again. Now you work with the lesson, and then you it's sort of set up like it's almost like a buffet. There's these lessons. You can do them by module. Every month there's a module with between 4 and 6 videos in it. But they're also broken down by categories. So if you want to work on your scales, pick one of the scale videos. You want to work on your chords. There's even a video where I play piano for the 60 most common chords. And I play it with a metronome, and you can play right along with me. You want to work on your major 7 chords? There's a video where I'm playing all the chords on piano. You can play right along with me. If you don't know them by memory, I actually have it all written out, every chord, but I do recommend doing it by ear. There's even a thing where you hit this little gear and you can change the speed of it. It'll keep the pitch the same, so you can play it at half speed or 3/4 speed. Or if you want to do it faster than I'm doing, you can speed me up on there. So, and it also includes email support. If you do have any questions or problems, you can write to me. I'll write back to you. And it's just a great resource. It's something I wish that I had when I was a kid, that I could go to that. And you can just play right along with me, and you can follow along in the detailed practice notes. So, yeah, it's $20 a month, on the yearly plan, and it's $28.95 for the monthly. And to me, just having that resource, it's just like, you can't put a price on it. It's like, there it is. You don't have to go to any kind of university. Like, a lot of times, even at a university, the underclassmen, the freshmen, the sophomores, they don't even get to the top guy until they get to their senior year, and then they have very limited time. You don't have to have anything. You just sign up. There's no pre-qualification for this, and the lessons are all levels. So I have plenty of things. I have one section, they're color coded. The yellow section, when you go to the site, you'll see this, and it's called Essentials. And those are the first ones to start with. So if you're not at a real advanced level, start with those videos. And then I have other ones that get quite advanced, where I talk about tritone substitution, and I talk about how all the theory works. It's a nice mix of stuff. And what you'll find is, you'll work on a lesson for a while, you'll gain some mastery over it, you'll go to something else, and then maybe a few months down the line, you say, let me go back and check that one video again. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh man, there's other stuff in here. You start to get at a deeper level on the same lesson. So it's really, it's just a great thing to have, on hand. It's like the ultimate toolbox. You've got it, and it's always there. And so I really recommend that. And that's a new thing. I just started it about 2.5 years ago, but it's going really well. And I have members all over the world, all these different countries. And the books are all over the world too, which I'm really proud of. The books are in 42 different countries.
Wow.
And I've actually sold over 100,000 books. This is a lot of saxophones. That's a lot of saxophone players since I started. That's about the total count. But and I say that not to brag about it, but just I'm in amazement that something that I composed in my basement back in 2002 when I was writing. That one, or these are just things I wrote for my private students back when I was teaching at those high schools, when I was doing the 65 students a week. Those things are now all over the world and used as they're on the jury at a lot of colleges. A lot of, like, the state of New York for the last 8 years has used those etudes for their audition pieces for all of the state of New York. And it's amazing to me. Like, I just wrote these things for myself and for my own students, and Joe Henderson was one of the guys who said to write etudes. He said the word to use, he said, it gives you something else to hang your hat on beside the melody and beside just chord arpeggios. He said that, and another teacher of mine, a guy named Alan Swain, who I studied jazz piano with in the 80s, he also thought it was a good idea. He called it slow motion improvising. He's like, you get a chance to make all of these critical decisions about how you want to develop your idea, and you don't have the pressure of having to do it in time. And he said, it's slowly taking your brain through the process of what it's like to improvise. Because really, improvising, it's about making decisions really quickly and deciding, okay, it can go this way or it can go this way. And so if you're playing something like, I call this fork in the road. This is one of the lessons on the site. You're going to go, it's this. There's two patterns to this, and you can keep going with pattern one. Okay, but you're going to run out of range pretty fast because you see it keeps going up and up and up. So you need a way to get back down, right? So when you get to that note, you got to decide if you're going to go up or you're going to go down. Okay. Am I going to go or we go either way? It's sort of like fork in the road. As an improviser, these are the types of decisions you're making on the fly while the song is playing. So you can do a ratio of 1 to 1. Right, that was 1 up, 1 down. Or maybe I'll do 2 to 1. That was 2 to 1. You can play around with that, but that's just a different way of thinking of it. Okay. An additional analogy for that one, I call it chutes and ladders. Okay. you're a little kid, did you play in Singapore? Did they play Chutes and Ladders when you're in like first grade or something? Do you know about that game?
Not really.
It's a very famous game. I think it was from America. Like, little kids, like like 4 years old, 5 years old, play this game. And in this game, I think if I remember right, your character either walks up a ladder to something or it goes down a chute, which is like a slide. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I call these Chutes and Ladders because it's like that's the ladder. You're going up. That's the chute. It's like a slide. You're going down. So there are 2 slides in a row. So you could say shoot, slide, however you want to do it. So you see the analogies. I don't know why they come to me. That's just been since the beginning. That was nothing they taught me in school. Yeah. Something about when I have to explain something, I'm able to take things from other walks of life, convert it to the exact musical thing that's going on, and convey that in a way that people can relate. I think a lot of it is because it's visual. A lot of people are really visual. The saxophone is not a visual instrument. We can't even see our hands when we play. We can't see anything. It's all by feel. I call it a kinesthetic instrument. And you, like I was saying early on in the interview, you got to hear the sound and be able to locate that note. And it's all by feel. And so it's not looking at something. A lot of times, sometimes people come to me and they used to play the piano and now they want to play the saxophone. And it's kind of blowing their mind because they're used to being able to look at the keys to see where their hands are positioned. Yeah. And I'm like, there's nothing to look at. It's all feel, and it's just a different way. You will get it. It's just a matter of taking the time to do it and giving yourself a chance to experience it. I think another negative in a lot of cases with the academic approach is that people have been beaten down so much. They've been told by so many teachers before they get to me, they're not talented, they're not good, they're lazy, they don't practice enough, whatever. They just don't have it. And I'm like, I call this baggage. You gotta let go of this baggage. It'll just keep dragging you down. None of those things are true. Maybe someone was a great player, but they didn't know how to teach in a way that was productive or in a positive way. Maybe, or like some of my old teachers, I had teachers, maybe they were a good player, but they used a lot of negative reinforcement. Like Joe Daly would do that sometimes. Like he would say, if he didn't like the way you were playing, he'd say, "Ain't making it, baby. Pay me and get out." And that was it. It was just like, okay. And I asked him once about it. He's like, "Yeah, it's sink or swim. You're either going to sink or swim. If you can't make it, then too bad. The strong ones are going to figure out how to make it, and the weak ones, well, then they'll go into something else. Well, I don't approach it like that. I believe that people actually are born with a good sense of, hearing a melody and being able to do a lot of this stuff. It's pretty natural, but they've been told for so long that they don't have any talent for it, or that they think, a lot of people say, "Oh, I just have to know a whole bunch of theory and then I can play good." That's not true either. You can do it even without the theory. You can just do it by the sound of it. It just has to make sense to you. Like, I'm speaking Japanese. I don't know any grammar. I learned it by the sound of it, but I know what I'm saying and I know it's correct. Yeah. So you can learn like that. Now, I took French in college for 1 semester. I can't speak French. I can read a little bit, but I can't speak. My accent was terrible in French, but my Japanese accent is smoking because I learned it in Japan from native speakers. So that's what I'm offering when people come to me for a Skype lesson or for the video lesson course. I've dedicated my life to this. I've been doing this since I was 12. I'm 53. And all that experience and my performance experience too, because that's a big part of it. I think there's a lot of teachers, well-meaning and talented teachers, but they were not players that went on. Like I was with the Woody Herman Band for a couple of years and the Midwest Band when they would tour the Midwest. I played with Louis Bellson. I played with all these big name guys. And that experience is priceless. The things that I learned standing like next to Clark Terry or standing next to Phil Woods and playing with those guys, it's a priceless thing. You can't quantify it, but those experiences are part of who I am as a player. And those are the things that I convey. And I make those things accessible to a beginning student who just wants to get started with this thing. Like a lot of times advanced players don't want to work with beginners. I'm happy to take someone, who's a beginning player. I taught a 12-year-old girl today who's the daughter of a guy that I used to teach many years ago, and he got too busy with family and business. He gave up the saxophone. Well, his daughter's 12. She loves the saxophone, and she's pretty good at it. And she came today for her second lesson. And for her today, she had memorized what she prepared for me. She memorized the first 6 hip licks and was playing them by memory pretty well, too. And she was even able to do some variations on them. And she's 12, you know.
Wow.
Now, I showed her some things, so just some creative ways of doing it. And she's like, oh, yeah, I can do that. And it's like she doesn't have baggage. The adults have so many years of being told that they can't do it, that they're not talented enough to do it. They start to believe that, and then it works against them. So that's one of the things. So many people in some of these Skype lessons, some people have almost even been kind of crying like because they're so happy. Like they're like, this is so much fun. My other teacher used to just berate me and just tell me how bad I was all the time. And I was just like, I just felt like, you know, like a failure. And it's like, this lesson was just so fun. We just had a good time. And it's like, I learned all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's how it should be.
Yeah. It
should be like that. There should be zero feeling bad in a lesson. Like I think that's, I remember I talked to some people. I was teaching at a summer camp down in Florida. And one of the class, I was the jazz guy. The classical guy was recounting his stories of studying with a famous classical saxophonist who's passed on. I'm not going to say his name, but he was recounting these horror stories of how bad the guy made him feel, about how inferior he was, and how he just developed almost like this kind of post-stress disorder after the lessons with the guy, because the guy just made him feel so bad. I'm like, man, that's the total opposite of the way I like to teach. It's like, it's just negative reinforcement. Yeah. It's just counterproductive. You know, it's got to be. It's work. When I was in college, I started reading all these books about how the mind works and how the learning process. And one of the things I learned was you naturally block out unpleasant memories and you retain things that are pleasurable, that you enjoyed, something that was fun, you remember. So it's like you're to a ball game or something like that. You're going to here would be baseball. And you know, the traffic was horrible and there was a big line to get in, but then the game was great and you had a wonderful time. And at the end of the night, you don't even remember that horrible drive going there because you remember that the game was fun and you enjoyed yourself. So I think it's the same thing with playing. You don't want to have negative things attached to your playing because I think ultimately that'll even come through your horn. And when you're playing on a gig, if you're this guy who's miserable every time you're practicing, that angst, that bad feeling is going to even come out in your solos. It's going to interfere with the beauty. You know, like when I hear Stan Getz or I hear Charlie Parker or Cannonball Adderley, Cannonball, he's so joyful. When I hear him play, it's like, oh man, this guy's just having so much fun. And that positive energy, it just comes right through the recordings. It comes through it. It's not even about technique or licks or patterns or anything like that. It's just communication, and it's communicating these emotions, these feelings. In order for that to happen, you can't have any negative feelings at all while you're playing. It has to be you're like a vessel, and the music's just kind of flowing through you. And you want to be, basically, I call it invisible technique. Like I want my technique on the horn to be so good that it's invisible. So anything I hear, it can just come out and I don't have to worry about technical imperfection. I know a lot of people are like, you know, I need to have, all the modes at 400 beats a minute in 8 notes, full range of the horn. I mean, yeah, that's a great goal to have, I guess, as a technique thing, but you could do that and it could be pretty cold sounding to someone. It doesn't sound musical. And then, you know, you put on a recording of one of the old guys, Stan Getz or Paul Desmond, and like, you just melt when you hear 2 notes of their solo because it just has so much feeling in it. Yeah. So that's Stan Getz sat in on a class once at Stanford. It was a theory class. They were talking about modes. And after an hour, they said, well, Mr. Getz, what do you think? And he said something so succinct and profound. He said, it's not the mode that matters. It's the mood. That's what he said. And that's basically, you know, that's it. You know, you can have all that. I taught a student once who studied briefly with Sonny Stitt. And there was a woman in Chicago. And she said, I started asking him about tritone subs or 2-5-1s. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about, but here's what you got to play. Like he wasn't speaking that language at all. Of course, he nails the changes. He's a total master and creator, one of the creators of the language. And he didn't think in those terms. And so I think it's great. Theories, it's an interesting thing. I love studying theory, and I've had a lot of theoretical training, but that does not make up for not hearing it. My wife, Judy, she's the opposite. No theory training. She couldn't tell you how many flats are in the key of G flat. She doesn't know any of that stuff. Yet she knows 5,000 songs, and she can play them in any key, and she knows all the lyrics, and she knows she can play the bass line, and she's beautiful. She's an incredible player. She doesn't know all that theory, but she's listened to a ton of records. She can sing it. She really hears it. And what she plays, she's really experiencing it for real. And that's how we play together. I'm not thinking about what scale am I going to play. I mean, that's the last thing. I'm just keeping track of my ideas, and I'm also keeping track of what the other people in the band are doing to make sure that we're really communicating. This is one danger of the play along records that I warn people about. A lot of people are used to playing with those. They grew up playing along with them, and they just kind of play on top of it. So then when they get with a live rhythm section, they don't interact. They don't leave any room in their solo for the rhythm section to answer them what they're doing. And that's a problem, because then the rhythm section kind of feels like they're left out of the conversation. So there you can play with those play along recordings and leave room. I mean, the piano players are great on those things. I mean, Kenny Barron's on some of those things. Hal Galper, another one of my old teachers, Hal's on some of those things, and those guys sound great. You can play, leave some space, let the piano fill in, and then maybe you'll play some idea based on one of their comping patterns they just did or something. So you can use those things properly. I just think sometimes people, they put them on, and like I said in the beginning, it's just sort of a fancy metronome. That's not the way to use them. You want to really listen. I've done studio sessions where I get called in, the album's basically done, but they need sax solos on a couple of tracks. And what I can do is play along with that pre-recorded thing and make it sound like it's totally interactive. Like I'm reacting to them and they're reacting to me. I can keep track of what someone does. Maybe the drummer does an accent on a certain beat or something. And you'd be really hard pressed to hear the final product and know that I wasn't really there live with those guys, but I made it up. It was interactive because I was reacting for real while I was playing with them, but I was just playing what I was hearing. That's such an important skill to have. You got to have that. I mean, that's because otherwise it loses the energy. Oh, and we should end with this, the Lobster Theory. I'll tell you the whole Lobster Theory. That gets into that idea. I was teaching, God, what was I doing? I was teaching, there's a bunch of things combined with this. But I'll give you the Lobster Theory. When you go to a restaurant to eat lobster, especially in Singapore, they're alive, right? They're alive in the tank, the lobsters. Okay, why don't they have lobsters like in the refrigerator or freezer from like a month ago? Do you know why? Like they have like chicken and beef and all that. They could freeze that and they put it in there. It's because it spoils almost immediately. It spoils very quickly, the lobster. So, and it's horribly cruel. I'm just using the analogy. I even said in the book, no lobsters were harmed in the creation of this cartoon for this book. But it's to get the concept across. The live lobster in the boiling pot of water. The boiling pot of water is the chord change. Okay, so let's say that's over here. Here's a new chord change. The idea is the lobster. Okay, if they're counting off Cherokee and you already know what you're going to play for your bridge of your solo, you've got dead lobsters. They're from like 2 months ago. They're not fresh. You got to come up with that idea. The chord change is here. The idea is here. That's the lobster. You got to come up with it right about here, maybe here. And then it goes in there. And so you got to have a whole tank of these lobsters. They're these ideas that are going to go into the pot. And well, where do they come from? How do you get the lobsters? Well, they come from you're listening to recordings and listening to the language. You have to develop a vocabulary. And when you're listening, so here's another part of the analogy. Imagine that your ears are like these nets, and in your mind is this tank. And when you hear Coltrane, your ear has caught him. And picture in your swimming around in your tank is a lobster with Coltrane's head on it. Okay, and then you listen to Paul Desmond. Now you got a lobster in there with Paul Desmond's head and a lobster's body. And you got all these different, like you got your Lester Young lobsters, your Dexter Gordon lobsters, all these guys. They're swimming around in this tank. Well, what happens is they crossbreed and you get a new species of lobster, which is your lobster, which is going to have your favorite traits of all the lobsters that your ears have caught. Okay, so that's where they come from. And then when you're playing and you're listening, you ever hear a record where someone ends a solo and then the next soloist comes in and they pick up where that guy left off? They take part of that idea and that's their start. That's what I call imported lobster, guaranteed to be fresh, because there's no way the guy could have been in his head pre-planning what great lick he's going to play, because he had to be present in the moment and hear how this guy ended and then just go right into it. So imported lobster is the best. Now, when you start playing in the beginning, you use what I call OPLs, other players' lobsters. But over time, you develop your own. And so you get your own inner lobster, and you get that when you're composing song. Composing is very good to develop the lobster. A beginning player, they don't have enough ideas. So they run out of ideas in a very short time and they start repeating themselves. So it's like they had 2 ideas. You take those 2 lobsters out of their tank, that's all there was. There's no lobsters left to reproduce. You have to have so many lobsters in your tank that no matter how many you take out, the tank is replenishing itself with more and more lobsters. Okay? So it just has to be, and you constantly replenish it when you're listening. That's why listening is so important. And it's much better to listen. Now, transcription books are great. My books are great, but some of my students who get the books, they actually learn my etudes by ear, and they only use the book as an answer key to see if they were right when they figured it out. They'll listen to it, play along by ear, or they'll transcribe it and then look at it. So reading is a good skill. Don't get me wrong. It's great to be able to read music. I mean, it's a very important skill. As a matter of fact, I'm working on my bass clef reading. Like I said, I'm working on reading through the Bach inventions on piano. Those things are hard. Really, a lot of independence going on. So reading is a great skill, but it's a different skill than the one you need to play jazz as far as improvising goes. You got to really be hearing in detail. I think a lot of people, they've associated the wrong thing with their fingers. They've got a hand-eye coordination thing going, because from the time they were young, they learned, oh, you see that dot on the page? That dot equals this finger. You got to get where that sound equals this finger. You got to switch that. Now, it's good to have both. That's great. But if your whole thing when you've been practicing has always been reading music in front of you and associating the visual with the location, you take away that stimulus. Now the fingers don't know what to do. It's like the guys who read the news at 10 o'clock and they're reading off a teleprompter. Well, what if the teleprompter went off? Now what are they going to say? I don't know. They don't know because they're just reading, So you've got to give yourself a fair chance. Give the ear a chance. I was teaching a guy who's a pro player in Chicago, and we were having this discussion, and we were trading solos back and forth, and he wrote an etude, and it was, technically correct. All the right notes, all the hip notes. It just wasn't, I wasn't believing it. And then I said, let me write an etude for you. Give me 3 notes. We'll take a theme. I wrote an etude, and at the end of the thing, he's like, wow, your process is so different than mine. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, you just do it all by ear. He's like, I'm always thinking about what scale I should be on, or what's the key center, or what's the mode. And he's a very smart guy. And I had him do it again. I said, try it this week my way. Don't worry about any of that stuff. As a matter of fact, when I wrote all these etudes, I wasn't looking at any chords at all. I heard the progression in my head very vividly, but I wasn't playing it on piano. I was just hearing the line. And then I put the chords on afterward and hear how it lined up, because I wanted it to be purely melodic. I didn't want to be having a situation where I looked at this chord symbol and I have all this preset stuff that I'm just going to plug in. I want to play what I'm really hearing. So he said to me at the lesson, he's like, I got to admit, it's like, I don't really trust my ear. I just don't trust that I'm not going to hit a bunch of wrong notes. So I'm always having to think of the theory. And the guy, he knows all the theory. And I was like, you got to get past that. You got to let go. You got to start trusting the ear and let the ear run the show. Even if you hit a few wrong notes, that's okay. But come at them honestly, like, to just do it all by the theory. First of all, that takes all the fun out of it. And when you do that, your playing will come across without energy. Like, a lot of times people can't put their finger on, well, why is it this guy, I know he's playing good notes, but it just seems kind of boring. And well, it's because they're playing in kind of an intellectual way, and they're not playing by really experiencing the feeling of it. So maybe they'll play a phrase like, right? And it's like, okay, those notes are nice, but if I were really experiencing that, I'd be like that. It's different. it's like I'm present this whole interview, which is almost 2 hours. My God, this is long. Sorry,
Yeah.
long, everybody.
No.
If you're still with us, thank you for sticking around. But if you notice, this whole interview, I was present and you were present. We were talking to each other and the focus was right there.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it was a fun interview. It had energy going back and forth between the two of us, even though we're in different parts of the world. It was happening. I wasn't just sitting here kind of, looking at my watch or thinking about what I'm going to have for dinner or anything, no, I was focused right on it. That's what it's like when you're playing. You got this deep focus, but it actually gives you energy. You get extra energy when you play like that. And and when you play the other way, the intellectual way, you actually, not only do you lose energy yourself, I believe that it actually takes the energy away from the audience. So like I was at an educator conference that when I was at, and they had some of these school bands playing. A night and day difference. One band went on and played, and I just felt totally exhausted after the set. And it's like they were good players, but it was just a million notes, and everything felt like everything was the same. Everything was loud. Everything was fast. And there wasn't enough difference. And then the next band came on, and there was all this shading and textures and dynamics and personality, and the people were having fun and they were laughing. And I actually came away. I was ready to fall asleep after the first band. After the second band, I had enough energy to like stay up another 8 hours. And that energy that the kids, it was coming across. And I think it's the same thing in playing. When you're practicing at home, if you're playing like a student and you're playing with no energy, and you have this kind of intellectual thing, and you're like, it feels like drudgery, and you're just going, oh, if I put in a half hour yet, oh, I'm so tired. Well, that's going to come across.
Yeah.
You got to play. It's got to have that. It's like I'm really playing. I'm not just faking my way through it. I'm really hearing those sounds. You got to have the whole thing. So it's like a lot of people will say, "Oh, I'm just going to work on whole notes for 2 hours or something like that." Yeah, that's a great idea, but it's not realistic. Like I'd say you're better off taking a ballad and just playing a ballad with a great tone, with a lot of feeling and a lot of nuance in it. That would be better than sitting there for 2 hours staring at a tuner or something like that and trying to get it perfect, one note. Yeah, go by the feeling you have. Like, what does it feel like when you're playing? Does it feel good? Are you having fun? If you are, you're doing the right thing. Are you hearing new things? It should be about exploration. You're exploring these sounds. The whole thing is like, it's all a journey. It's like, it's not really destination. By the time you get to the destination, you want to go somewhere else. So you have to be happy. Like, I love driving. I would just get in the car and drive around the United States forever. Because I just love the scenery. I like the different climates. I like all that stuff. So I'd much rather drive to Phoenix from Chicago, or I go to Phoenix often. I usually drive. It's 30 hours versus 3.5 hours of flying. But I love that 30 hours. I have a ball during the 30 hours. I'm listening to great music. I'm looking at the sky. I'm looking at all the clouds. I see a little antique shop off the side of the road, and I'll pull over and I'll talk to the guy who's been working there for 40 years. And, it's just great. I'll go to a little restaurant in some little town that you never heard of, or I'll get off and I'll drive through some cornfields. There's like these little farm towns. And it's really interesting, And then when I get to my destination, when I get to wherever I'm going, not only do I have great energy, but I've got like my mind is kind of expanded because I've met new people and I've got new things. I'll even turn on the radio so I can hear the sound of the local accent on like AM radio in some little town and hear what they're talking about and listen to their southern accent or their northern accent. That stuff's fascinating to me. So you have to be like that. Like, to me, if you're going to be successful in trying to do this and you're going to learn the saxophone and you want to be a jazz player, you have to really love the journey. You have to love the process of it. It's mostly process. And it's great. It's just as it should be. It's not easy, but it's so satisfying when you make progress. It's very rewarding. And you can't put a price on it. It's just so much fun. So I think that's probably a good place to end it. We're right coming up in 10 seconds on the 2 hour mark. And we could go on another 8 hours. I once had a conversation with a guy like that. We were talking about this exact thing. I was at his house. I came to pick up like one of my books or something from him. We talked for 8 hours straight. We were both shocked. I went out, it was dark out, and we talked for 8 hours without stopping.
Wow.
And so, it's just the energy was there. Once the energy's there, you can just keep going. And it's like, it was interesting. Every once in a while, I'll see the guy. And you remember that time we talked for like 8 hours? It's not a guy, I don't know him that well. And he's like, yeah, that was really wild. And we were in a different place for those 8 hours. We were just in this intense conversation about music. Yeah. And it was really cool.
Yeah, and I feel that a lot with all the guests that come on, these conversations, sometimes it's really hard to stop within 1 to 2 hour time frame. But we can always do follow-up sessions. I really appreciate your insights, and I see so many similarities also. I also love to use analogies and using food as well. And just hearing your stories of Stan Getz and you studying so much of his music, that was really fascinating. And I'm definitely going to sign up for your video course, and I think we have many students here in Asia who are really serious about learning jazz, and like you said, it's a great complement to their private lessons also. It doesn't have to be either or.
Lessons. I had someone write the other day, it's like, oh, I'm studying privately. I'm like, this is a supplement to any the stuff I'm showing you in this is not what your other teacher, however great he is, he's not going to be talking about the lobster theory and the snakes and all these things that I've made up over the years. There's no way, because these are just things I made up, and it conveys the information in such a different way. So I say, if you've got a good teacher, that's great. This is a supplement. It's not instead of.
Yeah. I'm going to share the
teacher, then it's absolutely going to help you, because you can use it sort of like that,
Yeah, I'm going to share the link here one more time. And I mean, it's the price of a meal, every month, which is just ridiculous. I mean, 175 videos and counting. That's thousands of hours, of filming, editing, and
study for sure. And they're very watchable, because they're between 5 and 20 minutes per video, somewhere between there. Most of them are around 10 minutes, but they're so dense. You can watch them over and over again, and you're going to see more and more. And you'll get deeper and deeper into the level of it. And it's a lot of fun, because there's so much variety there. There's something for everybody. You want to work on ear training today? There's something on that. You want to work on theory? You want to work on technique? There's all kinds of stuff on there. So check it out. Like I said, you can sign up for a month and just try it out, and then switch over to the yearly plan, later on.
Yeah, sounds good. And thank you so much for those who have stayed with us. And I know for Greg, it's midnight now.
I'm a musician. I'm up till 5 in the morning. It doesn't matter.
Wow. Yeah. And thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Roxy, for being here. And we really appreciate Greg and your time, your sharing, your knowledge. And so guys, please do check it out. And you can also follow Greg on social media and check out his YouTube channel as well. Tons of videos there. But definitely not as much as if you subscribe for his online lesson.
It's gregfishmanjazzstudios.com. That's the website.
Yeah.
And Greg, there's a little sign up for an emailing list. Sometimes people write and they're like, oh, I signed up. Well, no, that's just to be on a mailing list. There's a thing that says subscribe. Click on that link, and there's one that says membership. You can click on either one of those links, and that will take you. And it'll say, do you want the month subscription or the year subscription? The year is a better deal.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, basically, you're getting the third year almost for free. 20 a month, 20, a month or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And Greg, you take one-on-one private lessons on Skype.
Absolutely.
As well.
I love teaching one-on-one private lessons. Yeah. I'm thinking of offering a new thing coming up sometime in the next month. Maybe we can get some feedback on this. A lot of people are doing this, I'm noticing now. Like Facebook has kind of a room feature, and everyone's on Zoom. So I was thinking of offering something where I do a workshop once a week for a 1-hour workshop, maybe 10 people maximum, because I want it to still be interactive, where I have like a chord workshop or a scale workshop or a voice leading or ear training or anything like that. And what do you think? I was thinking maybe that would be a popular thing. I could even have a couple of them a week. I could just say on Friday nights at 7 p.m. Chicago time for 1 hour, the first 10 people that sign up, that's going to be our class. And if there's more people, then I'll add another class.
Yeah.
in addition to this private one-on-one Skype lessons, which I still enjoy doing. Like I said, I got about 30, 35 people like that. And I'm still scheduling people. I have room if there's anyone interested in studying. And no, you don't need to be advanced to study with me. I'll teach you from the first day. It's fine. It's a lot of times it's better because you have no baggage at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people are afraid, like they come to a lesson with me and they're like, I really wanted to study with you 10 years ago, but I was so afraid that you'd be too demanding. I'm like, no, we were just having a good time here. And no, you're not like that at all.
Yeah, I think small group classes are nice as well, and especially when it's like-minded people.
What do you think as far as the number of people? 5 people, 10
I think
people?
5 to 10. I think
10.
5 to 10 is nice, but 1 hour may be slightly short, because
maybe make it 80 minutes or something like that.
Yeah. So in case there are questions, you can go around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this online format will not go away even after the COVID situation, and it allows you to connect, with many people at once. I mean, you wouldn't want like 10 people over at your house like all the time.
Right. Though you got to be careful. Like when I started researching it, if you go to YouTube and you type in Zoom meeting fail, and you watch what some of these people have done, it's really bad. Some stuff.
Oh, I need to check that out. I haven't checked it out.
It's really crazy. Yeah, type it in. You'll be like, oh no.
I mean, you have a great video and audio setup, and the saxophone comes through great. I think
it's just an iMac. It's just the iMac. That's all it is. It's a 21-inch iMac.
Yeah,
I have a really high-speed connection, so I have a really good connection here, and it works great.
Yeah, it's really good, and I think that would be something for everyone to keep a lookout for.
So keep an eye out for that. I'm deciding right now. I'm checking out the format, deciding if I want to do it on Zoom or on YouTube or on Skype.
Actually,
or on these other ones.
This platform that I'm on now, which is StreamYard, they just increased it to be able to take 10 people.
Oh, really? Well, that might be perfect.
People can put up their questions. You can design it. It's quite cool. I could send you the link.
Send me a link to that. Yeah, before I go ahead with it, I really want to check it out and make sure everything is set to go.
Of course.
And then when it happens, I will announce it. I'll put it on my website and I'll put it on my Facebook page.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. And Adelina and Pablo, thank you. We really appreciate you guys being here, and hopefully you took home many nuggets of wisdom from Greg, and then you can contact Greg directly for his video lessons or private lessons as well.
Right. If anyone wants to email me directly, I'll just give you my email. It's greg1111@aol.com. I still have that account. I have a Gmail one too, but I still have my old one from 30 years ago. greg1111@aol.com.
All right. I just typed that out. So yeah, thanks, Greg. I mean, we really appreciate that.
Yeah,
there are a lot of people.
Great talking to you. It was a really fun interview.
Yeah, and there might be people who may not like people contacting them through email, so I'm sure this is greatly appreciated.
No, it's fine. Some people, I know some people who don't like social media. They were on it and they're like, it's too much. They got off of it totally. And they're like, I understand that. They want to just get off the grid. And like taking too much of their time. I mean, the social media, it's got positives and negatives. It's got both. Yeah. It depends how if you let it get you could get very upset and you could really get drawn into all kinds of arguments with people. And it's like, you're not going to convince anybody of anything on social media that they don't believe already. So there's no point in going on somebody's page with the opposite view and then making some big deal out of something. It's like, it's just kind of a waste of your time. You're better off just get your horn out and just play some music.
Yes.
But use, if you just put it in perspective, social media, it's great. It's great for connecting with people. And it's not a great place to try to convince somebody with the opposite views of you that you're right and they're wrong. That's not, to me, that's just kind of, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fine if you want to have a discussion. I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with people with different views, and that's great. It doesn't get into that with social media. It's not like an in-person discussion. People hide behind their computer and they say all kinds of horrible things that you would say that in person to somebody.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes people just need to think twice before they post something on social media, even if it's their, it's well-intentioned. But Yeah, but man,
Right.
yeah, I guess
Sometimes people think something is funny or something, but really it's offensive. And they don't see that. And it's like, now something I might say to my best friend from childhood that might be, offensive. I would never say that in public. It's just some private thing between me and my friend because it's an inside thing and it goes way back with us. And it's like, yeah, you got to be careful. That's the thing. I think people don't realize that. They post something and 5,000 other people see it instantly.
Yeah.
And they didn't even think about that. They were just thinking about maybe their two closest friends who are going to laugh at it when they see it.
Yeah.
And it's public thing. You got to be aware of that. It's in public. You want to really have a serious discussion, call somebody on the phone.
Yeah.
And or see them in person. That stuff still that's a lost art. Just talking to people instead of texting and stuff like that.
For sure. Yeah. Sometimes I wish I could not be on social media, but just at this point with what I do, wanting to get the word out, it's a great platform for that. But yeah, I'm just super cautious about even commenting on other people's, like post, and sometimes we don't have the full context, and before we jump to a conclusion and reply to something, sometimes I rather just not do it,
Right.
and really just control what I say, so but
Right.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
for
I mean,
sure.
I'll say something if I believe something is correct or true that I really want to share, but you just got to be mindful, when you do that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you so much again, Greg,
Great,
for
it was
your time.
great, and let's stay in touch,
So great
Daniel,
to
and I'll see
connect.
you in the
For sure.
video lesson group. You're going to get a
Yeah.
welcome letter from me. Everyone
Yeah.
who signs up, you get a welcome letter from me and an
Oh,
email
nice.
and a kind of an introduction on what videos to start with.
Nice. Sounds good. And yeah, thank you so much for those who are watching. For those in the US, please have a good rest. And for those in Asia, have a good day. And actually tonight in Asia at 10 p.m., I'm gonna have Jay Metcalf from Better Sex as my next special guest. So it's gonna be fun, and we're gonna be talking about his videos and his websites as well. So yeah, thank you once again, Greg, and hope all of you have a good day. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Daniel. I'll see you soon.
See you soon.